The train screeched into Dry Mesa Station under a July sun that scorched the earth like a branding iron. Dust red as old blood swirled across the wooden platform, clinging to the warped steps leading down to the cracked ground below. Clara Mae Jenkins stepped off the carriage, her cotton dress damp with sweat, her brown hair tied back in a tight knot. In her calloused hands, she gripped a worn canvas bag, holding three things: a wedding dress wrapped in newspaper, a Bible etched with CMJ, and a letter from Jedediah Turner promising a home and a heart to welcome her. Clara stood at the platform's edge, the wind picking up, tugging at her skirt. 30 minutes passed and no one came. The sun climbed higher, baking her neck, but she didn't move. An hour dragged by, then two. The heat pressed down, turning her collar soggy, her lips dry as the boards beneath her boots. Still, she waited, eyes scanning the horizon where dust rose like smoke. At the third hour, a rider appeared, his horse's hooves kicking up clouds of red grit. Jedediah Turner, in a clean shirt and polished boots, looked just like the photograph tucked in his letter. Clara's heart leapt, and a trembling smile broke across her face. He dismounted his spurs, jingling faintly, and studied her. His brow furrowed, his eyes tracing her broad shoulders, her sturdy frame. Clara's smile faltered. Jedediah didn't offer a hand or a word of greeting. Instead, he spoke, his voice flat as the desert itself. "You're not what I expected." He paused, lips tightening. "I wanted someone delicate, soft, not like you." The words landed like a whip, sharp and final. Clara stood frozen, her breath catching as if the air had turned to glass. Around them, the station was indifferent. A porter hefted crates past her, his boots thudding. A boy kicked a tin can down the street, its clatter swallowed by the wind. No one saw Clara's heart crack. No one heard it fall to the dust without a sound. She didn't cry or beg. Her fingers tightened on the bag, and she gave a single small nod, as if moving too much might shatter her entirely. Then she turned, walking toward the heart of Dry Mesa, her back straight, her steps steady. The red dust followed, curling around her like a shroud, but she didn't look back. Across the street, Wes Harlan leaned against the counter of his general store, a weathered building stuffed with rope flower sacks and silence. At 35, he was a man of few words, his face lined from years under the sun, his gray eyes sharp but guarded. He'd lost his mother to a sandstorm a decade ago, and since then, he'd lived alone, speaking more to his horse than to men. Through the store's grimy window, he watched Clara cross the main street, her canvas bag swaying her chin high, despite the whispers already spreading through town. The bride who got sent back, they'd call her soon. Wes didn't join the gossip. He just watched, noting the way she moved like someone who'd learned to carry weight long before this day. The town of Dry Mesa stretched before Clara, a scatter of wooden buildings bleached by the sun. Saloons and stables lined the street, their signs creaking in the wind. She passed men in wide hats, women with baskets, none sparing her more than a glance. Her boots stirred the dust, each step a quiet defiance. She stopped at the apothecary, where Martha, a sharp-tongued widow with gray hair pinned tight, was sweeping the porch. Clara's voice was steady as she asked for work or shelter. Martha squinted, then nodded, offering a corner of the attic for $2 a month or 12 hours of sewing a week. Clara accepted without hesitation, her grip on the bag never loosening. Wes, still at his counter, saw Clara disappear into the apothecary. He turned back to his ledger, but her image lingered, those steady eyes, that unyielding posture. He didn't know her name yet, but he felt a flicker of something, not pity, but respect. Outside, the wind howled, carrying red dust through Dry Mesa's streets, covering tracks and secrets alike. Clara climbed the narrow stairs to her new attic room, the bag heavy in her hands. The sun sank low, painting the sky the color of rust, and in that moment, Dry Mesa held its breath, waiting for what this woman might become. Clara Mae Jenkins woke before dawn in the attic above Martha's apothecary, where the air was thick with heat and the faint smell of liniment. The slanted walls pressed close, the roof leaked, when dust storms brought rare rain, and the single window rattled in its frame. Yet Clara counted herself fortunate. She had a roof of purpose, and a canvas bag still holding her wedding dress Bible and Jedediah's letter untouched since the day she arrived in Dry Mesa. She tied her brown hair back, slipped on her worn cotton dress, and lifted her tattered basket. Inside were a needle spools of thread and a few pieces of hardtack wrapped in cloth, her tools for survival. Each morning, Clara walked the streets of Dry Mesa, her boots stirring red dust that clung to her hem like a memory. She knocked on doors offering to mend clothes for children or patch curtains for widows. In return, she asked for breadwater or a corner to rest. The town was not kind. Women whispered as she passed, their voices sharp. "There's the bride sent back." Men smirked, muttering, "Too sturdy for a husband's horse." Children pointed, giggling, "She's the one nobody wanted." Clara heard every word. Her fingers tightened on the basket's handle. Her steps quickened, but her head never bowed. Each insult was a stone, and she built a wall with them, stitch by stitch. At night, she climbed the creaking stairs to her attic, lit a single oil lamp, and sewed under its flickering glow. The wind howled outside, rattling the window, sometimes fierce enough to shake the door on its hinges. Clara didn't open it, not out of fear, but because she wasn't ready to let the world see her yet. Her heart, like her bag, remained closed, holding its contents tight. She mended torn shirts and frayed aprons, her needle moving with precision, each stitch a way to mend herself. The hardtack dwindled, but her resolve did not. She ate sparingly, drank from a tin cup, and slept on a thin pallet, the wedding dress still folded in its newspaper, a ghost she couldn't face. Dry Mesa's streets buzzed with gossip, and Clara was its favorite subject. At the saloon, men laughed over whiskey, calling her the returned parcel. At the church, women clucked. She thought she'd snag a rich man, ended up with nothing. Clara walked past her basket, swinging her eyes fixed ahead. She traded mending for a loaf of stale bread from a baker, a bucket of water from a stable hand. Once, a widow paid her with a single apple, bruised but sweet. Clara ate it slowly, savoring each bite as if it could fill more than her stomach. Wes Harlan watched her from his general store, where he sold flower rope and quiet observation. The town knew him as a man of few words, his face weathered by 35 years of sun and loss. His mother's death in a sandstorm had left him solitary, his life measured in ledgers and dust. Clara's daily walks caught his eye, not because of the gossip, but because of her refusal to break. When she entered his store, he didn't stare at her broad frame or call her by the town's cruel names. He simply pushed a spool of thread across the counter. "Green's gone," he said, his voice low. "Purple dough." Clara nodded, her fingers brushing the spool. Wes's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Purple patches wounds just fine." Their exchanges were brief, but each one chipped at Clara's wall. Wes began setting aside small things, a fresh spool of thread, a dog-eared book of frontier tales, once even a biscuit wrapped in wax paper. Clara noticed her eyes lingering on his hands, calloused steady, not like Jedediah's polished boots. She didn't ask why he did it, but she started lingering longer at the counter, her basket resting on her hip. One day she said, "You don't talk much, do you?" Wes shrugged, wiping the counter. "Words don't fix much. Actions might." Clara's lips curved, the first smile she'd allowed since the station. Her days settled into a rhythm, mending by day, sewing by night, and brief stops at Wes's store. The attic remained her refuge, its walls marked by her quiet defiance. She began a quilt from scraps of fabric, old shirts, torn curtains. Each piece a day survived. The quilt grew slowly, its uneven stitches mapping her time in dry mesa. One night, as the wind screamed outside, Clara held the quilt to her chest, the lamp casting shadows on the slanted walls. She thought of Jedediah's letter still unopened, and the wedding dress she couldn't bear to touch. Her fingers traced the quilt seams, and she whispered, "I'm still here." Across town, Wes closed his store, the lantern light catching the dust on his boots. He thought of Clara's steady gaze, her hands worn from work, her refusal to let dry mesa crush her. He didn't know her story, but he saw her strength, and it stirred something in him, a memory of his mother who'd faced storms with the same unyielding spine. As he locked the door, the wind carried red dust through the empty streets, and Clara's attic lamp burned on a small, stubborn light in the heart of dry mesa. The sun hung low over dry mesa, casting long shadows across the main street, where dust swirled in lazy spirals. Clara Mae Jenkins walked toward Wes Harlan's general store, her basket swinging lightly at her side. Her cotton dress, patched at the hem, bore the faint stains of red earth, and her brown hair was tied back strands loosened by the morning's work. She'd spent the day mending a widow's quilt, earning a loaf of cornbread and a ton of molasses. The town's whispers followed her, the bride sent back, but Clara's steps were steady, her eyes fixed on the store's weathered sign. Inside, Wes Harlan stood behind the counter, his gray eyes scanning a ledger. At 35, he was a man carved by solitude, his hands calloused from hauling sacks, and his face lined by years of wind and loss. He didn't gossip like the saloon crowd or judge like the churchgoers. When Clara entered, the bell above the door jingled, and he looked up. "Thread today?" he asked, his voice low, rough as the oak counter. Clara nodded. "Purple if you got it." Wes reached under the counter, pulling out a fresh spool, its color deep as a desert twilight. "Always keep some now," he said, his lips twitching into a half smile. "You go through it fast!" Clara's fingers brushed his as she took the spool, a fleeting touch that warmed her more than the July heat. She lingered, resting her basket on the counter. "You read that book I left?" Wes asked, nodding toward a dog-eared copy of Frontier Tales he'd slipped her last week. Clara's lips curved. "Halfway. The cowboy in it talks too much." Wes chuckled, a rare sound like gravel shifting. "Guess I'm safe then." Their words were few, but each one felt like a stitch pulling them closer. Clara noticed the way Wes looked at her, not measuring her size or pitying her past, but seeing her as if she were more than the town's cruel stories. The door jingled again, and Jedediah Turner strode in, his boots polished, his shirt crisp despite the dust. His eyes flicked to Clara, narrowing before he turned to Wes. "Whiskey and tobacco," he said, tossing coins on the counter. As Wes fetched the order, Jedediah leaned back, smirking. "Heard you're stocking thread for the seamstress now, Harlan. Careful, she's a load no man wants to carry." His laugh grated sharp as a spur. Clara's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Wes's hand paused on the whiskey bottle, his knuckles whitening. He slid the items across the counter, his voice cold. "Your change." Jedediah shrugged, pocketed the coins, and left his laughter trailing like smoke. Clara stared at the counter, her basket heavy in her grip. Wes broke the silence. "He's a fool," he said quietly. "Always has been." Clara met his gaze, seeing not pity, but anger, a flicker of protectiveness she hadn't expected. "I'm used to it," she said, her voice steady. Wes shook his head. "Doesn't mean you should be." He reached under the counter, pulling out a small parcel of biscuit and a thin book of poetry wrapped in brown paper. "For the road," he said. Clara took it, her fingers lingering on the paper. "You don't have to," she said softly. Wes shrugged. "Want to?" That evening in her attic, Clara sat under the oil lamp, the book of poetry open on her lap. She read a line about a woman who walked through storms, and her thoughts drifted to Wes, his quiet strength, his hands that offered without asking. She remembered his mother, who he'd said taught him to tie knots against the wind. Clara opened her Bible, tracing the CMJ carved inside, and whispered, "I'm still me." Downstairs, Wes locked his store, the lantern casting shadows on his face. He thought of Clara's eyes, fierce yet soft, and the way she stood tall against Jedediah's venom. He'd never told her about his mother's last words, "See the strong ones." Wes. They're worth keeping. Clara left the attic the next morning, her basket lighter with Wes's gifts. As she passed the store, she caught his eye through the window and nodded a silent thank you. Wes nodded back, his hand resting on the counter where her spool of purple thread still sat. The wind swept through dry mesa, carrying dust and whispers, but between Clara and Wes, something new was growing small, steady and stronger than the town's scorn. Clara Mae Jenkins sat in her attic under the dim glow of the oil lamp, the air heavy with the scent of dust and wax. Her quilt, pieced together from scraps of old shirts and curtains, lay across her lap, its uneven stitches a map of her days in dry mesa. Each patch held a memory: the red dust of the train station, the widow's cornbread, the purple thread from Wes Harlan's store. She ran her fingers over the seams, feeling the weight of her survival. Tonight, she would finish it not for herself, but for him. She folded the quilt carefully, wrapped it in brown paper, and tied it with a piece of twine. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the certainty of what she was about to do. The next morning, Clara walked to Wes Harlan's general store, her basket empty, save for the wrapped quilt. The July sun baked the streets of dry mesa, but her steps were steady, her cotton dress swaying lightly. She passed the saloon where men's laughter carried Jedediah's old taunts, but she didn't falter. Inside the store, Wes stood behind the counter, sorting nails into a tin. His gray eyes lifted as the bell jingled, and a faint smile curved his lips. "No thread today?" he asked, his voice rough but warm. Clara shook her head, setting the wrapped quilt on the counter. "This is for you," she said, her voice steady, despite the pulse hammering in her throat. "For that chair you read in. It's hard on the back." Wes paused, his calloused hands hovering over the package. He untied the twine, peeling back the paper to reveal the quilt. His fingers traced the patches, faded blue-worn gray scraps of red, each stitch deliberate, each seam a story. His breath caught, and for a moment he looked not at the quilt, but at Clara, as if seeing her anew. "No one's ever given me something like this," he said, his voice low, thick, with something unspoken. Clara met his gaze, her eyes clear. "No one's ever made me feel I could make something worth giving." The store was quiet, the only sound the creak of the floorboards and the distant hum of dry mesa's streets. Wes folded the quilt carefully, setting it beside the counter. "My mother used to say a gift like this carries a piece of the giver," he said. "You've given me more than cloth, Clara." She swallowed, her fingers tightening on her basket. "And you've given me more than thread, Wes. You saw me when I thought I was invisible." Their words hung between them, soft as the dust motes in the sunlight streaming through the window. Wes stepped around the counter, his boots scuffing the worn wood. He stopped a foot away, close enough for Clara to smell the faint scent of leather and coffee on him. "I used to sit alone at night thinking I'd forgotten how to hope," he said. "Then you walked in and I started remembering." Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She thought of Jedediah's letter, still tucked under her pillow, no longer a chain, but a reminder of what she'd overcome. "We're not so different," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Both patching up what's left. They stood there, the world outside, fading the saloon's laughter and the town's whispers irrelevant. Wes's hand twitched as if wanting to reach out, but he held back his eyes, saying what his hands did not. Clara smiled, small but certain, and turned to leave. "Keep the quilt," she said over her shoulder. "It's yours." Wes watched her go, the quilt in his hands, its weight grounding him. As Clara stepped into the street, the wind felt lighter, her heart no longer a thing to be stitched shut, but something ready to unfold. Dry Mesa glowed under the lanterns strung across the main street, their lights swaying in the warm July breeze. The summer festival filled the town with music, the twang of a fiddle rising over laughter, and the clink of glasses. Clara Mae Jenkins stood at the edge of the wooden dance floor, her purple dress dyed by her own hands catching the glow. Her brown hair was tied high, her eyes steady, no trace of the wedding dress or the letter that once defined her. She hadn't come to be noticed, only to stand among the crowd, to feel the pulse of a life she'd fought to claim. Wes Harlan moved through the throng, his clean shirt tucked neatly, his boots polished but worn. He saw Clara before she saw him, her silhouette sharp against the lantern light, unyielding as the day she'd walked into his store. He approached his hand, hesitating at his side, but his gray eyes certain. "Clara," he said, his voice cutting through the music, "will you dance with me?" She turned her gaze, meeting his, searching the crowd, then herself. "You sure?" she asked, her tone light but testing. Wes nodded, his smile small but firm. More than sure. They stepped onto the dance floor, the wood creaking beneath their boots. No one had taught them to dance, but their steps fell in sync, guided by the fiddle's rhythm and the wind's soft push. Clara's hand rested in Wes's, her touch steady, his grip warm and sure. The town watched, but their whispers faded, drowned by the music and the sight of two people moving as if the world had no claim on them. Clara felt Wes's hand at her waist, not forceful, but present like the quilt she'd given him, a promise without weight. The song slowed and they paused, faces close, the lantern light painting their shadows long. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice soft for seeing me. Wes's eyes held hers, the lines on his face softening. "Thank you for being strong enough to stand here." The music ended, but they lingered, the breeze carrying the scent of dust and cedar. Clara stepped back, her smile free, her heart no longer stitched shut. Wes watched her, knowing she didn't need saving, only someone to walk beside. As the stars emerged over Dry Mesa, they stood together, not bound by vows, but by a quiet understanding that they'd found something worth keeping.